could take like an hour.
I guess a lot of people in there.
Yeah, I saw the slots. It was about jam packed. So yeah. I remember there was a long time, like I wasn't able to get blood for years. Like after I got the service, because I went to like third world countries and they don't want you bringing home weird diseases or something. And then I went through chemo and they told me don't donate blood because you'll make other people sick. I was like, okay. And then when I started donating blood again, like I told you, then I got sick from donating that. So I'm supposed to keep my blood. My wife's like one of the magical donors. Like anybody can take her blood. She's so negative. Yeah, she can. She has that magic blood. Like I'm a universal receiver though. I'm O positive. So if I need your blood, I'm taking it. All right. So hey folks, it's March the 31st, and this is going to be our last lecture of the week, and we're going to discuss imperialism today. And so tomorrow I'm going to post an assignment for you, which means we're not going to meet again until Monday. So remember the notes for this are in the Google Classroom. Let me open on my end what we're doing today. It is, gosh, I got too many tabs. There we go. But I can't close them. I just can't do it. Yeah, so remember we were talking about how, what's funny is in another class, we're talking about something similar to this as well. Oh yeah, it's geography, yeah. So we're talking about how borders were being changed, countries created by foreign powers in Europe. We had wars of colonialism, where the local people were put down as rebels and stuff like that. So yeah, however, the colonizers saw themselves as a civilizing force. So this was justified with morality. But on the other hand, you could see the morality of the opposition. So it's tricky stuff. What was this attaining on? I think. No, never mind. No, I was going to say like this was the entrance to Lake Victoria, but no, because I don't think they have palm trees there in Central Africa. I'm not sure what this is now. Hey guys, it's a pretty picture. All right, so effects continued. Colonies gained infrastructural improvements such as railroads, telegraph lines, and stuff like that. So the colonizers brought with them their forms of transportation, communication, technology, medicine, hospitals, administrative practices, coinage for trade, manufactured goods, education, literacy, religion, social structure, relative peace, and they acted as a police force to keep down crime. So there were some good things that came from the colonizers. So there was injustice, but there was also, on the same time, there was like things like safety and commerce. And that's the thing about people, right? Like there's no such thing as people being like totally bad in their efforts, but that doesn't mean they're always good. Humanitarian efforts provided medicine, improved infrastructure, increased life expectancy for where they were at. Spread education through economics. So just like I said, European technology and forms of government spread throughout the world, bringing modernity to more people. So then in some places where the colonies were set up, like a lot of Africa, there was a lot of disunity afterwards and stuff like that. However, other places will learn from their ex-colonizers and become more modern countries. Like you see that with like India. And you especially see that with places where the U.S. had been after the first part of the 20th century. So we're talking about like South Korea. Like South Korea is now one of the most modern countries in the world. Before the Korean War, a lot of the villages were still like living in essentially like grass huts and stuff like that. So yeah, I see that here and there. Of course, that's more of a different subject. But yeah, so there's good, there's bad, and it's kind of like a subjective opinion. Like what's worse, having your political say so, your ability to have your own culture and things like that stolen from you, or is it okay because you're longer now and you're safer and you're educated so you can read and stuff. So it's It's one of those things. It's one of those things. I'm not going to tell you what I think the answer is. It's up for you to figure out as growing people. Heck, the whole point of education isn't for me to tell you what to think. You're supposed to be a whole person. Think for yourself. Just don't think evil thoughts, okay? We'll have to put you in prison. All right. Yeah, did you know something like 25% of all the people in prison are in prison in the U.S.? We prison more people than any other country in the world. All right, you ready to move on? Be nice to have a reading room like that. Yeah, I think what I did is I just picked period pieces from the 19th century. I think that's what my theme was. That's why I'm not kind of like off topic a little. All right, so during this period, this is, remember, after the scientific revolution. And so science is like really taking off. Now there's going to, like, remember last time I talked about some pseudosciences, like phrenology, studies of skull shapes and stuff like that. But we are going to see the burgeoning of real sciences as well. And some are yet to be discovered. But of course, it takes time for this stuff. Scientific advancements in the Industrial Revolution. Innovations led to improvements in agriculture. Large fields could be cultivated. And a guy called Jethro Tull is an example for inventing the seed drill. So innovations led to improvements in agriculture. So one thing is that they discovered is, like, in the Middle Ages, the peasantry, if you remember, we had our map, and I talked about this the other day, and you had the common fields, and I told you had like the little strips of land that each peasant had to go. Well, you might not remember, there was also fields that went fallow, and that means they let the weeds grow up there for a couple of years. They didn't understand that. They didn't understand the idea of putting nutrients back in the soil. They knew how to use fertilizer, which is basically just their feces. And they would just kind of throw it out in the field. They throw animal dung out in the field to help the plants out. But it would still deplete nitrogen from the soil. That's something that plants need to grow. They can live without it. They can't really grow tall and strong without nitrogen. And so what they would do is once the plants stopped growing well, they wouldn't use the field for a couple of years and just let it go wild. Well, after the scientific revolution, they're going to discover you can rotate crops. And so what I mean is, like, you might grow wheat, and then after that, you'll grow like clovers. And so like clovers, like 4-leaf clovers are really good about replenishing nutrients back in the soil. And then you can use your field more often, and it's more efficient, and you're making more money. Also, you're starting to see improvements in technology, like steel plows and automated machinery to help reap crops and stuff like that. And, a lot of different things to help out. And of course, later we get artificial fertilizers and stuff. Discovered better method of crop rotation, new methods of animal and plant breeding. And so, like, the idea of breeding breeding animals to get stronger, larger forms of cattle that can produce more milk and beef, chickens that produce more eggs, things like that, but also cross-pollination for plants. And so this is essentially the same thing, where you might take pollen from plants that you really like, that have a feature you like, and you'll pollinate them with another plant of the same species to get that feature. So you can get apples that grow in a longer growing season. You can get fruit that's larger. That's what happened to corn. The Native Americans knew how to do that. Corn used to just be grass with a little bitty corn cob bud on top of it. But through cross-pollination, they took the larger ones and kept breeding these plants and pollinating them until they got larger breeds of corn, where they could get better food out of it. Well, people have been doing this for thousands of years. It's just with the scientific revolution, they figured out how to do it faster and more efficiently. So machines led to less labor-intensive farming methods. Yeah, machines do the work for you. New inventions modernized cotton and textile industries. So y'all, yeah, what we're going to talk about next year, like, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. And so that's one tool right there. And that's going to revolutionize cotton, because cotton comes in these little bowls, they're called, and they have all these seeds in it. And like, cotton's from India. And so people in India, they would just by hand pick the little seeds out, pick one at a time, until they could finally get the strands out and make cloth. Well, the cotton gin was essentially just turn a crank and it'll just spit out the seeds and all this cotton, so you can use it for cloth. And so it's going to make it cheaper and more efficient. Early factories located near water. Well, yeah, it's because shipping is a lot easier on boats. And sometimes you might need a lot of water for steam engines and stuff. Or if it's a water plant, So this is for energy and transportation. That makes sense. Civilizations always need to be near water. And it makes sense that a factory be near water too, There we go. I guess we're moving on to politics. This is a famous painting from France of what's called the tennis court oath. It's like, y'all might remember in your book, we were talking about King Louis XIV. He was an absolute monarch. Nobody had any rights, but he spent a lot of money. Well, I think it was his grandson, Louis XVI, is going to try to do the same thing, but they're going to kind of go bankrupt. And when they go bankrupt and they try to be an absolute monarch, you're going to have a rebellion. And this rebellion is going to be fueled by the ideas of what we call the Enlightenment, this period of philosophers who are talking about individual freedom. And they're going to look at the example of the American Revolution. They're like, they overthrew their king, let's do it too. So, but they're going to kind of go a little past that. So, political changes in the Industrial Revolution. New laws are passed to address new issues that come with industrialized society. You get the factory, so this is a list of laws, right? And these laws are English laws, but they're going to influence American laws. What happens in England specifically, and Europe in general, Americans usually over time adopt it, right? And sometimes we adopt things that are going to influence them. So during this time period, factory work was brutal. It was dangerous. You worked long hours, 6 days a week. You basically just went home to go to bed. And there wasn't even schools for the kids. And so the children are just kind of running wild and dirty. The parents were working all day. And sometimes the kids were working too, in very dangerous factory jobs. They have little arms and hands that can go into places adults' arms and hands can't. And sometimes the machinery would just suck the kids up, chew them up, injure or kill them. So it was a pretty brutal time period as far as work goes. And so this is going to call on where people are going to ask for reform and demand it from their government. It's going to lead to the Factory Act of 1833. Reduce the amount of hours that children could work in Britain. So they're like, look, kids are spending way too much time working. If you're spending 12 hours a day in a loud, dirty factory, they're not learning, certainly not playing, they're not developing right. People saw this as cruel. Then you get the 10 Hours Act. Further reduce the work hours for women and children in Britain beyond that. So they're like, look, at this time, there wasn't really much in the way of childcare or schools. So it was mothers who had to look over their children. So by reducing their hours, the idea was to help out these women. Now, not all women wanted it, however, because if you're super poor, you need money. But on the other hand, sometimes your boss will tell you to work even when you don't want to. So The Reform Act of 1832 allowed 1 out of 5 men suffrage. It's the right to vote, and removed rotten boroughs in Britain. This is the spreading of the right to vote. So 1 out of 5. So not everybody qualified. If I remember right, you still had to be at least somewhat of a property owner. And a rotten borough is like this. So for Parliament, instead of having states vote, they call them boroughs. But these rotten boroughs were essentially places where nobody lived. So they didn't really represent anybody. You're going to see before this time, before the 1830s, the right to vote is going to spread more so in America first, especially before the election of Andrew Jackson. So this is a worldwide movement where more and more people are getting the right to vote. Not everybody. It hasn't moved on to women yet, and it hasn't moved on to a lot of the world's poor, but it is going to move on. And of course, in America, you're going to have a racial component develop as well, like as I'm sure you're aware of. All right, let's go ahead and do one more. I'm going to call it good for the day. Nice little country cottage. Got your yard bird. Cluck, cluck, cluck. All right, economic changes, industrial revolution. The creation of the factory system led to mass production of standardized goods. So standardized goods are like this. It's where things are measured, right? So if something is standardized, that means it is the same every time you bring it out. This is really important for things that like you think are made of like nuts and bolts and that you might have to repair. So that's pretty important. You look at computers, they have standardized parts. They have standardized motherboards and different kinds of chipsets for the processors. You're going to have different kinds of RAM, but it's going to be standardized RAM that can be interchangeable with other computers. Same with hard drives. If you look at USB ports are usable. They're standardized, but you can use them across different platforms. Well, it's the same back then. Like one easy way to look at it is like firearms. So like firearm that's standardized, made in a factory. Well, if there's something like you bang up your barrel or something like that, you can order a new barrel to put on your firearm. Instead of having to take it to the ye old blacksmith and hope he hammers out something that looks halfway straight. These goods were, of course, readily available for purchase, and so they're shipped around the world to be sold. Tariffs were reduced in order to help international trade. This is when the world is entering a period of something closer to what we call the free market system, where governments are reducing government-led monopolies, runs of businesses, and also, what's the word I'm looking for? Like regulation. And tariffs are essentially a tax on goods that come into your country. But that tax ultimately falls in the hands of the consumer, usually the poorest consumers. In 1846, the Corn Laws were repealed in England. So the Corn Laws were like this. In England, they call any grain corn. So it could be wheat, barley, or maize, American corn. But they had laws that made it where if they shipped in grain from another country, it had to get taxed. The reason they did it was to help out their own farmers. Because if wheat from France cost more than wheat from England, you're going to buy the English wheat. So that helped out the English farmers. But it kept food prices pretty high. So it helped farmers, but everybody else kind of suffered. They're going to repeal this. And so the spread of free enterprise leads to an explosion of innovation and economic development in England and much in Europe. And so during this time period, it's going to be a little chaotic. A lot of things like worker rights and stuff like that are going to be not so great. But because there's so much room to make a profit, you're going to see a lot of invention and human energy put into making profit, solving problems, starting businesses, making a lot of money for a lot of countries. So there's some good and some bad with it. But if you're a pure free market person, you'd say, well, the unjust things would work themselves out anyways, because then people just wouldn't work there. But oh well.
Hey, that's more for economics. All right, kids, that's going to end our lecture for today. If you have not done your study island, do so now. I'm going to post a new assignment tomorrow, and I'll see you Monday.
I think,